Welcome to the Women in Transport podcast. I'm your host, Shireen Ali Khan, and this is season 2, where we are covering everything intersectionality. We're looking at the layers that make us who we are. We're looking at privilege, looking at oppression, and really what makes us human. Welcome to the Women in Transport podcast. Today I'm joined by Georgia Yexley, who is CEO and founder of Loud Mobility. And I've been really looking forward to having this conversation because, yes, we know people professionally, but really understanding kind of the origins of all of these programs and kind of co-facilitators and co-partners that we work with in the sector. But really, where do they all come from? So, Georgia, over to you, a brief introduction to you, but really, what inspired you to venture into this space of sustainable transport?
Well, thanks for the warm welcome, first off. Such a pleasure to join the podcast and always a pleasure to chat with you, Shireen. Big question, though. What inspired me? I think it's been a long journey, actually, of little bits of inspiration along the way and being in a position to follow those little moments of inspiration. You know, I didn't start out in the space. I never kind of set out intentionally to wind up in sustainable transport and mobility, but through a series of kind of smaller decisions of learning in my career path quite early on, things that I had a genuine interest in or things that I felt truly passionate about, and where I had the opportunity to grow and where I had the opportunity to use or learn new skills, making a series of decisions to just step further into that led me into sustainable transport and mobility. And once I was in, there was no getting out. I've said to people, I think it's coming up 10 years now in the sector, which is like quite shocking for me. To have done anything for 10 years is bizarre. But I've said to people, you know, I've thought about doing something else at various points, but there's just never been something else that is as immediate, as impactful, as wide-reaching, and that I have the skill set to make an impact in, than the transport space, because it just does connect with so much. So yeah, it's the inspiration has been a lot of smaller moments of inspiration along the way, and yeah, having the support and the courage at points to follow that inspiration.
Tell me more about that. What were some of those key moments that really inspired you to do this?
Well, it really started when my journey into the sector started when I was living in China, in Beijing. So, I mean, that was the first leap, moving overseas, getting used to a new way of life, culture. I worked in the tech sector. So I was working with a lot of different kind of Chinese companies that were expanding into the Western market, into the US, Europe, Latin America, all over. But I kind of started out in the tech side of things. And I was working actually in the space of cloud computing. And I was like, loving what I'm learning. I love the fast pace, love all the opportunity to kind of grow my skills and reach out into all of these kind of global markets and just, wow, learning so much. But I really don't have that much interest in cloud computing. So I then thought, okay, maybe the thing to change is the product or the service, and I thought about, you know, what I enjoyed at the time. I was very much loving my traveling and joined a travel tech startup, and that was great. Learned loads and felt, okay, it's a bit more creative. It's connecting with something that I have an interest in. It's a little bit more people focused, but the impact and the meaning and the values aren't quite connecting. And then this interesting bicycle started showing up in the city I was living in, this orange bike that we kept seeing everywhere. And we're like, why is everybody getting this same bike? This is so surprising. And this job opened up that actually a friend sent to me, and it was with Mobike. So really, really early in their journey, when they had just launched in a few Chinese cities. And a friend had sent me this job ad and said, look, this is a description of you. You need to apply for this job. And that was the encouragement I needed from someone who really knew me and understood what I was looking for. And I went and had a conversation with the international director at the time. And yeah, it just, I felt super inspired. And I joined Mobike really early on. I think I was the international expansion the international team member number 4.
Wow.
Yeah. Uh, Within the year of when I first joined,
Mm.
we started when it was a scrappy startup, working in a co-working space. And then a year later, we'd taken over the whole building. We had 250 cities of services around the world. That, the growth was breakneck, which came with loads of learnings, loads of challenges, loads of amazing successes and partnerships. And it was, yeah, it was a crazy, crazy ride. A lot of people don't know, but Mobike, one of these first kind of app-based micromobility services, Mobike was also the fastest growing technology in terms of user adoption ever. And that is, I think, the most impressive thing to me of if you chart it against ATMs, mobile phones, all of these incredible innovations in technology, the growth and the adoption and the rate of that adoption, if you chart those against each other, for Mobike was so much faster. It was absolutely insane to get to that kind of billion people, even tens of billions of people that were able to use the service. And so, yeah, it was just an incredible experience. And that opened me up to also all of the potential that there was in the space. At the same time as it being the fastest adoption, it also was the fastest ever unicorn company. I get different reactions when I tell that to people because usually there's this assumption like, oh, it's not in the UK anymore.
Mm.
Something must have gone terribly wrong and it's no longer exists, this company, because it's not on our doorstep, but it still exists. I was with the company for 2.5 years. They were acquired. That their parent company then IPO'd. They still deliver bike share services internationally at huge scale, and to this day, operate them. And that quick speed of growth and that quickness to achieve those incredible milestones came with, yeah, a huge amount of learning that I think we still need to be better
Mm.
at digging into and learning from at an international level and sharing those insights from those crazy journeys that happen really early on, and not just kind of put blinkers onto them of it's not here, it didn't work, therefore nothing to learn there. I think there's a huge amount that we can still dig into from those early days. And yeah, so that was my kind of journey in. But after the Mobike days, I really learned that the partnership and the slower pace and the longer term were where I really enjoyed the work and where I felt that it was moving in the right direction. And so I kind of followed that through then working at Beryl and supporting their growth in the UK, and then moving to Tier, where just before setting up Loud Mobility, I was head of cities and then general manager for the UK and Ireland. And yeah, I think, I've moved through different operators and I kind of came through the more commercial, tech-based, private sector side of the industry. But what I found was where the work was really delivering the values and the impact and the output of why I joined the sector was where we were working on those cross-sector projects, working with the cities, working with community members or organizations, with the focus on what are the benefits that we're trying to deliver for folks. So with Loud, it's really just given me and my partners and our collaborators the opportunity to do more of that, which is super fun.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, and just your journey, it's really interesting just listening kind of where you've come from, and genuinely how you've been able to take those skills and that learning into every next role that you've had. And I don't know whether people do that consciously, but we do that in some ways, whether it's good habits, good learning, bad learning. But you've been able to work with organizations really, as you said, initially kind of scrappy startup, but right the way through to billion users. But that sense of growth, that sense of innovation, that sense of trying new things always, because there's almost no blueprint to cut and paste from. I think there's a real talent in there, and that real want to innovate, make mistakes, but just to keep growing, keep growing. And it's obvious that you've been able to take that to other roles. You did say that when you started up initially, kind of more in the tech side of things, that yes, the growth was there and the interest was there, but maybe your purpose and that sense of impact didn't quite align with you. So you've been able to take that same way of working into certainly other roles like in China, but definitely into Loud. So I'd love to talk about some of the real kind of missions and visions of what you see for Loud Mobility?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think you're so right. That kind of growth mindset
Yeah.
and the ability to fail, but not necessarily in the context of, move fast, break things, and that's great. It's actually, you know, I think it's more a growth mindset that I try to apply is more not necessarily about the speed of movement. I'm a bit more of I like to take things in, reflect a little bit more. It's, sometimes we do things fast and that's great if it's suitable, but also it's about, a willingness to fail and still stop, pay
Mm.
attention as to why, and then take that learning into the next thing that you do.
Well, I think
Um,
that's the mark of a good leader to be able to. What you almost is for me, you're describing both things. You're describing the need to grow, and yes, sometimes fast is good, but actually, a good leader for me, is someone who can take that beat, take that moment to reflect, say, okay, let's actually before we take our next step, work
mm,
out what happened there. And I think it's a real leader that is able to create that sense of pace.
mm,
And I've seen it with startups where sometimes they haven't. I've worked with some founders and some MDs who haven't been able to have that understanding of let's just take a second, let's reflect, but they have just focused on growth. And it sounds like from your experiences, you've been able to really kind of just temper that and say, actually, well, how fast do we need to go in order
mm.
to go far?
And I think there's just in transport in general, there is this sense of urgency that tends to kind of take over sometimes, that actually a lot of the benefit that we want to achieve and a lot of the things that need to happen in transport are much more long term. They can be slower paced, they can be more thoughtful. Sometimes you don't need to rush into another piece of research about something versus take some time to do a little bit of reading and a literature review as to what else is at what's already out there, and you might actually come to a richer position or a better opportunity going forward just by having that kind of reflection. And I think, yeah, this kind of leads into what's important for us at Loud is recognizing that that's not always internal and singular to the organization that you're in. That opportunity for learning from each other, the opportunity for reflection on what's happened so far, what's out there already, who's doing things well, who might need more support. This is the area that we work in. So our mission is to raise the volume of joyful, sustainable journeys, which I always say joyful is the real key word in the statement. But we do that really importantly, we do that through cross-sector collaboration by getting people to work together, by working with people who are doing things well. We don't want to replicate something that somebody is already, really leading on and bringing skills to. We want to work with that person and help them work with others to spread that knowledge and to, be able to do more collaboratively. But yeah, the joyful journeys aspect is really important for us because there's kind of two sides to it. One side, and I think what's really integral to the type of work that we do is wanting to raise the bar of what we're aiming towards when we talk about sustainable transport and mobility and increasing adoption or increasing trips or improving access, improving inclusion. Often when we talk about these things, we talk about bare minimums like safety and even just the ability of the option as the marker of that's when somebody's included, that's when somebody is able to take this form of transport. And actually what we feel is we should be aiming towards positive experiences and take a much more human-centered approach, but we also feel that's how you actually change mindset and are able to deliver behavior change is by actually appealing to positive experiences and really affecting the kind of cultural, social aspects that do have a really important influence on how we travel and how we move around the world. And so at the same time as we're aiming towards delivering positive experiences in the way that we do our work, it's also about being creative and joyful and engaging and focused around people having a good time. We always kind of take that beat, that moment of reflection in key projects that we're working on to say, are we enjoying this? Are we having fun doing this? If we're not, we're probably not doing the right things.
Yeah, I love that. Whenever I speak to yourself and other colleagues, that's a real sense, like there's a real kind of vibe that I get from everyone's actually having a really fun time. And I think what a great statement to have actually in your mission. It's the kind of they're upfront, and then your vision for what you do is to make things joyful, because I feel like we're so serious with what we do, and yeah, life is serious. Life can be as you want it, but I think if you put joy as one of your kind of upfront goals, then you're halfway there to achieving it. And I think if it's one of your measures to say, are we genuinely enjoying what we're doing? Is this joyful?
Mm.
I think people will then have a just a nice time doing everything, whether it's a user, whether it's an employee, whatever it might be. I feel like those your stakeholders will genuinely be having a good time being part of that story.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head that it's not just about stating the value, it's about actually having that as a measure of success. And, a lot of what we're doing, we've talked about our methods and what our mission is, but the real big picture vision is about affecting system change. It's
Yeah.
about affecting how do we measure success in our transport system, in how we deliver these services. Is it realistically the right measure of success to talk about cost benefit ratios and even binary metrics of mode shift as successful if people are having really poor experiences, and actually maybe the long-term behavior change isn't happening, even if you're seeing those measures make sense? Who's represented? What are their experiences? These questions are what we want to bring into our broader measures of success
Mm.
across sector, for government bodies, the civil service, for private operators. We know that actually who's getting this really, really right is often in the third sector, the community side, the grassroots side. And so also wanting to make sure that we're valuing that work and we're valuing the contribution in those measures of success in across sector as well. So yeah, it is, the big picture really is about affecting how do we talk about success in the transport system. And then, alongside this, our own kind of internal taking the moment to look at, are we enjoying this? There's an element of also wanting to contribute to bringing vibrancy and new ideas and new innovation into this sector by showing it actually is quite fun to work in as well. And there is that opportunity for more creativity and more exuberance in the kind of work that we do and how we showcase that to the world, that transport is actually incredibly exciting at times and hugely impactful and so immediate. And I kind of joked about looking at leaving the sector at various points throughout the career, just not
Yeah.
finding anything else, because it truly has been, a challenging journey for sure, but incredibly joyful,
Mm.
incredibly joyful. And so we want to show that to young people, to people that are massively underrepresented and undersupported in being in the sector as well, to come and shake things up. And we need that vibrancy to grow and to make it a more joyful space for us all to work in.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of said it as well. Like there is something about the transport sector where, similarly to yourself, there's been a couple of times where I've kind of taken sidesteps out of the sector, but there's something that brings you back. And
Mm.
I think you said this initially actually around that, just a real ability to create change. And I think that this is the sector where you can really see the impact of that change, where change in itself. So in the NHS, I remember a stat around change takes about a generation to occur within the NHS. And I really understand why that is, because things are evidence-based and research-based, and there's a whole sense of practice before things unfold within the National Health Service. And if you take transport as being a similarly large kind of anchoring sector, change could take a really long time. And yeah, there are some things that will take a few years just because of bureaucracy and kind of the right levels required before things happen. But I do think it's a sector where you can actually see some of that change, and the infrastructure projects are a really good example where innovation is just part of the fabric of those projects, and you can really see it from program to program. And I do think sustainable transport is probably in a similar kind of growth set where you can really see that impact and that change. So that really resonated with me when you said actually there have been times where you've had opportunities or wanted to leave, but actually there's just something that brings you back. And everyone that I speak to, there is just something really special about our sector that just keeps people in. And what a joy. I found transport in similarly a kind of random way, but my whole career has been in transport infrastructure, and my dad was in transport, so I feel like there was a role model there somewhere, but I didn't know that was a thing until I have, similarly, I've had like 20 years in the sector, and so more people I speak to, I see that that's a common theme.
It's quite interesting that I definitely resonate with hearing that from a lot of folks, that you kind of maybe didn't even consider the sector a sector to get into before suddenly you found yourself here and were like, hold on, there's a huge amount going on here, and it crosses over with so much of everything else that's happening in the world. But most of us didn't kind of sit down and think, right, I'm getting into transport. you just you just you add on the things that you care about, you add on the things that you have interest in, and then you find yourself here and realize that it's absolutely integral to so much of, human experiences, social cohesion, health, well-being. I mean, there's so much that it impacts and touches on, that I think it's those threads that people come into the sector through, and then there's a day where you suddenly look around and go, hold on, I'm a transport nerd. It's too late.
Absolutely. Exactly.
Hello, I'm Sonia Byers, Chief Exec of Women in Transport, and you're listening to the Women in Transport podcast. I'm proud of the work we're doing together to create a safe space for different women working in transport to share their stories. You can find details on how to join the conversation in the episode show notes.
Tell me a little bit about your intersections and any challenges or any kind of ways where it's actually been of benefit. But just I want to hear your journey of, you're a female CEO in what is quite a predominantly male sector, but I know there's more to you than just being a female. But tell me about your kind of human experience being in the sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think hugely beneficial to recognize the massive value of my own intersectionality, but also of the experiences that I've had with so many diverse and varied individuals, organizations, cultures in throughout my career has been massively beneficial to recognizing that value and recognizing how much opportunity there is in celebrating that more, and celebrating the contributions of real intersectional change makers and activists and organizations, and really digging into how much value has been created out of the intersectionality that exists, but also how much opportunity there is to create more value in the sector by encouraging more of that. My own identity, I mean, it's how long have you got? So yeah, I mean, I as I mentioned, I started my career in China, so I was a foreigner, I was other, but in a really different way. It was a really humbling and an eye-opening experience to step into a different culture and to, have challenges and opportunities and learnings that came out of that. I also had the opportunity to work internationally. So I worked in so many different cultures through that initial period in the sector of working across Latin America, Southeast Asia, Australasia, all over. And one of the challenges was that even in that really international time in my career, I worked with very few women of color, very few. There was actually, and I can't remember if we've spoken about this before, but there was a moment when the company I was with was acquired, and I was one single lone Black woman in the company in, I think it was 44,000 people.
Wow.
And it was just, and we were operating in Brazil, in Chile, in like in the US, it was just, and I really dislike looking back and thinking of these moments that, often people would talk to me about being, oh, you're the first woman of color doing this, or you're the first this, as if it was kind of to be celebrated in some way. And of course, it's great that there is a first, but it's a little bit mad
Yeah.
when it's something that is so vital and so connected to everything that we all experience in the world around us, that was even possible just a few years ago. And it hasn't changed as rapidly as I would like. And I think I've definitely benefited from acknowledging that and being vocal about it, and being, I suppose, pointing out the lack, and then also being in positions myself to do something about it. So through them, my career trajectory, I've been able to build super diverse teams across gender, age, background, nationality, every protected characteristic, because not necessarily even by policy or like I've sat down to make sure I meet these targets, but literally just by hiring the best people for the job and knowing that there's value in those different perspectives and having seen the value that's come out of that. And that has naturally led to having super diverse teams and really incredibly, I mean, I'm super proud of the teams that I've been a part of and that I've been able to build throughout my career history. I still have incredibly close and valued and deep friendships with many, many, many of those individuals and people. And, I think seeing that value and celebrating that value has been a major factor in all the support and encouragement and ability to build Loud Mobility the way that we've built it. It's come from that network. It's come from those genuine relationships and recognizing the value of that intersectionality. And then, I mean, the another really key aspect of my own identity and the connection to Loud. So a few years ago, I went through a lot of life change, went through a really difficult period. I had lost my dearest, longest, closest friend and, really struggled with the grief and really struggled with kind of feeling that I was in the right place in life and that I understood myself well. And I went on a really difficult journey, but it led me to a place of, really understanding myself better. And I recognized my own neurodivergence. I was diagnosed with ADHD at 31 years old, which was life-changing. It really opened my eyes. It was really a difficult journey. You look back on life and with this whole new lens and level of understanding of yourself. But the biggest thing it gave me, that diagnosis, was an ability for self-compassion that I had no idea that I was lacking. And with that, came its own grief, but also this immense joy of, wow, I don't have to be so hard on myself, I have more ability to take that pause and look and think and give that compassion that I think I've been good at giving others, but wasn't very good at all at giving to myself through many, many years. But it's also given me the capacity to recognize my difference in the way that I think, the pattern recognition, the connections, this is the way that Loud Mobility works. We're all about making those connections, bringing people together around opportunities, gaps that we're seeing in the sector. And, this big gap that we saw of being joyful about the work that we do. But yeah, being able to really lean into that and celebrate that difference and what it has allowed me to bring to the sector, but also what it's allowed me to learn from others. So yeah, I am a woman of color. I'm disabled. I was a young woman in the space for a while. I say was because I don't think I count anymore. I remember when I turned 30, because I started in the sector when I was quite young. And I remember when I turned 30, I was relieved because I didn't have to have that annoying conversation anymore, and people would just ask me how old I was and then we could move on. So, I tick quite a few boxes and I'm so grateful for that because I think it's enriched my experience, my personal experience in life so much by allowing me to see how much value I get out of, or just, being surrounded by people that tick all the rest of the boxes, or whatever boxes, or just that intersectionality, that difference, and being able to celebrate that is very much at the heart of what we're doing at Loud. And it's been at the heart of my own kind of career and experiences. And yeah, it feels very, very good to be in a space where can really wholeheartedly celebrate that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And what a journey you've had, and you mentioned about just even the grief that you went through, and just that the diagnosis you went through after, and age, and just everything that you've been through. But what I can see, there is a real willingness and ability to just pause, reflect, understand what you can take from those experiences to make your next journey the better journey. Because we can absolutely sit in those feelings, and we should sit and feel those feelings, absolutely. But I think what I'm taking away from where you speak is just what's the positive that I can take from this? Well, how can I reflect on myself better? How can I serve other people better? Because you mentioned quite a lot about relationships and just making sure that you've got such a kind of varied tapestry around you, because you genuinely understand the betterment and the better product, the better organization that you would get from having all those variables around you. And it just shows that for me, you do that quite naturally. But I do wonder if some of that's come from as you said it as well, actually, from your kind of early days, by working internationally, surrounding yourself by people who didn't look like you and didn't necessarily speak like you. I'm sure there was a language that you had to learn at some point as well. So there's all these kind of new things, right, that you're having to take on. I do wonder if it's a mindset, but I feel that the more that we kind of expose ourselves to those other stories, and certainly what we hope for the podcast as well, where if you haven't got the opportunity to share all those lived experiences with people around you, listen to things like the podcast, talk to people, share those stories, because you'll find those commonalities, you'll understand the differences, but you'll certainly understand why people behave they behave just by sharing a little bit of their life.
And being open to that. I think you're absolutely right. I think, what I think has carried me through, and what I see actually being a really common thread in the sector for people who kind of work in the way that we do, and have that level of interest and connection to the work that they're doing, is the love of learning. That is the basis that we kind of come into it with, is that openness to learn, constant
Absolutely.
interest that's
Yeah.
there. What I wasn't always good at was the stopping and reflecting and feeling the emotions and recognizing the emotions. And, now being able to build that aspect more into how I'm doing things. But yeah, the love of learning has always been there. And I was once described as by my former boss as having a bias for doing, which I think is basically just another way of saying ADHD. But I think that bias for doing, that love of learning, but then now being at a stage where there's more ability to bring the personal and human experience, and recognition of emotions, and recognition of the need to pause sometimes, and the need to stop and look around. That's what's kind of the combination of things that's put us into a position to be able to build something like Loud Mobility, that is really sitting in that space of creating more connection, more genuine connection, more trust, and more joy in how we deliver projects in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And let's talk more about Loud Mobility. I'd love to hear about some of the projects that you've been working on, some of those kind of, you mentioned a lot about collaboration and working with grassroots and communities. If you've got any stories you'd like to share around that area, that really kind of highlights the work in action, I'd love to hear some more about that.
Oh, definitely. And I'm so excited to share some really current news as well, because I think it will be incredibly relevant for some of the listeners to know about this very joyful project that we've just launched. So we were commissioned by Lime, and in partnership with the London Cycling Campaign, our three organisations have come together around a campaign built around cycling joy. And it's called the Share the Joy campaign, and it has three elements to it. But I think the most exciting part, and the type of work that we're really excited about delivering, is this new fund, community fund for cycling joy in London. So with this incredibly generous contribution of £100,000 that Lime have made, we've established this fund. We hope to grow it massively, but it is very much focused on the outputs towards community organizations, activists, individuals. It is not about the hoops that you jump through to access this grant. It's about how is it going to help you to deliver experiences of cycling joy to Londoners. Those are the criteria. We have really intentionally made it as low barrier to access as we can, and focus on those outputs, because that's also the wider change that we want to see happening in how investment is trickling down, how it's being applied, making sure that it is actually going towards those interventions that are delivering joyful experiences. And we've been able to set up this fund thanks to, as the cornerstone to this campaign. So yeah, if people go to sharethejoyfund.com or sharethejoyfund.co.uk, either works, you can find out more about the fund and applications. The next round is September. But also in establishing that fund and the wider campaign that we came together around, it was really important for us. We kind of started with the premise that Lime, LCC, and we were part of a wider fabric that was contributing to cycling joy. And in setting up the fund and in doing any kind of campaign that's recognizing cycling joy in the capital, it should be about recognizing that wider fabric. And so that's where the fund idea came from. But also what we did was we pre-selected and directly awarded 9 organizations who were already doing the work, who have been doing it for years, doing it incredibly, and doing it off their own steam, often without a huge amount of resource or support. And we wanted to celebrate them. So we brought them together with the grant, but we also pulled together this amazing coffee table book. So much more kind of creative output and joyful output that's something physical. And then also put together our festival of cycling joy, which we held last weekend. Hence the bags under my eyes today. It's been a huge week. It was incredible. We have this incredible space in Camden in London, where we're based and where we held the festival. And I had stepped inside to the office. I can't print something off or something, God knows. And I stepped out and into the space and into the playground because it's a former school. And all of a sudden the sun came out and I was just looking around, all these smiling faces. There was music, there's food, there's people are toasting, people trying on new accessories. And it was just incredible, like that was a real moment of thinking, yeah, that reflection of, yeah, this is truly joyful. We're really doing the right type of work here, and super diverse. We had people of all ages, genders, backgrounds, abilities on all different types of cycles, and everybody was comfortable. Everybody was smiling, accepted, welcomed, celebrated. And it just was, it was a true celebration of cycling joy. And so we say it's the first festival because we are definitely going to do another, maybe not too soon because it did take a lot of work. But yeah, it was truly phenomenal. So again, this is the type of work that we do. So we have the cross sector, we have stakeholders from a huge number of organizations and sectors coming together around this concept, but there's still that kind of rooting in the longer term impact and the wider change that we want to see in how we talk about cycling, who we include in that, and making sure we don't forget to sit and stop and celebrate the benefits. So another kind of comparative project would be a piece of work that we're doing with TfL and London councils. So this time it's not so much as much public facing, but it is about engaging London councillors, the stakeholders around the e-scooter trial. So we work across all forms of sustainable transport and mobility. You've got walking, wheeling, cycling at the top of the hierarchy, but that goes across public transport, really broad reaching. How do we move people to as many options as they can possibly have? And so we're working with TfL and London councils on a kind of engagement piece to bring together their key stakeholders, decision makers, the folks who have the decision making, the power and the responsibility to deliver these really pressing goals around transport decarbonisation, health impacts, well-being impacts, and to engage them with the real data, engage them with what's happened already, celebrate the hard work that's gone into 3 years of delivering these trials, and engaging them with their role in what the future for new forms of transport and mobility is going to look like and their role in delivering that. So it will be a fun event, but it will also have that element of engaging them with the real content, bringing that conversation together, bringing a broad range of stakeholders together to exchange their insights, exchange their challenges and objections, and create a warm and safe space for them to do that. So yeah, we work on a real kind of diversity of projects, but they all have that common thread of collaboration, of helping people to communicate the benefits, helping people to communicate the joy, and doing that in a way that's more creative and welcoming and engaging for people. And I guess that, a really good example of how we then take those opportunities and learnings and build that into more is our She's Electric campaign. So this is something that was the brainchild of my amazing business partner, Kaz Canella, and part of what brought us together, which is all about just giving more women the opportunity to have joyful experiences on e-bikes and showing that there is an e-bike for everyone. There is an e-cycle for everyone. There are so many different ways that you can come into this and gain and enjoy and benefit from e-cycling. It's not just about, isn't it great? You can pick up more shopping and the kids from school. It's also you can go and shred an e-gravel bike in the woods if you want to, if that's who you are, you know, which is definitely more my cup of tea. So, you know, we've been delivering these activations across the UK. We've got a series of activations coming up in Norfolk, and huge amount of collaboration with different brands and organizations, grassroots organizations, community organizations, local government, national government, that has come together to help us build that campaign. So yeah, again, she'selectric.org, got some incredible stories, role models, freebies, discounts, all sorts, that we're growing in that space to just make it easier and more fun for women to have those joyful experiences on e-cycles. And, you know, we've centered women, we very much centered women, all women, and a really diverse representation of women in this campaign. What we found is that means we are able to achieve like a over-representation of women and non-binary folks in our events, but it's very much a safe and welcoming space for everybody. And that's the power of catering to the folks who are currently not served in other spaces. You make it available, accessible for everyone. And so that's really at the core of the She's Electric campaign, is centering where we see the biggest gap currently, which is in that gender cycle gap, and not allowing that to happen as we see these new modes come forward, that we create the space and we're vocal and active in creating the space to address that. And then we see actual really diverse representation, and we create a space and opportunities and methods and access points for everybody by catering to those who aren't catered for elsewhere.
I love that, and I really can see that sense of safety that you create, and I really love how you described it. If you tailor it to those who are vulnerable in society or perhaps not represented, by doing that from the offset, you're making it easier for everybody to get involved without having to then think afterwards, actually, oh, we missed out some people. So I really love how you tackle representation.
Absolutely. And this goes across all protected characteristics. I think particularly if you look at disability, in the way that we invest in, you know, millions into infrastructure. And if you had just thought about, is this accessible for everyone at the outset, you can save millions of pounds every year just by designing, by thinking for everybody from the outset, by bringing that equalities work into everything that you do. It's not just ethically the right thing to do, it's also commercially the right thing to do. It's also just in terms of your actual ability to deliver services well, to operate in the transport world, to operate in the world, in anything. You could apply this to any industry. It's not only about it's the right thing to do, that should be enough in itself, but it's also the right thing to do, the most sensible thing to do, any other way that you turn it. So you don't have to go back and fix things if you design for everybody from the outset. And so again, that's that level of wanting to influence maybe the way that things are done in the sector, to be more thoughtful about who are we serving in this decision making, and really challenging that, you know, really early on, instead of having to come back to it once it's, you know, the gap is already there or the lack of access is already there, and then trying to fix it by investing millions into the same piece of research 50 times over, you know. Just design that way from the outset.
No, exactly. I've got three quick questions for you. My first question is, and we haven't touched upon this so far in any great sense, but that kind of entrepreneurial mindset. So for our listeners, what advice would you give to them if they wanted to have a bit more of that growth mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset, to take them into their own projects or their own lives? What one piece of advice would you give people?
I think self-compassion. Yeah. I think we spoke about that and how important that's been in my own journey. I think self-compassion is critical, because you are going to work hard to build anything that you're passionate about, and that you know that if you're going to become a founder or launch a business or join something new and stretch yourself, you're going to work hard. It's par for the course, but it's going to be really much tougher if you don't bring that level of self-compassion to say, you know what, I'm tired, I need a day off, or I'm going to move this meeting because nobody's going to die if I do, and I actually just need to sit and have a cup of tea and reflect for a moment. Or, you know what, we didn't get that project, and or we didn't submit that document, or whatever it is. To have that ability for self-compassion, that you're only human, is so important to your survival and your ability to also really enjoy the moments that are just so enjoyable when you start working for yourself and working on the things that you really care about. So I think self-compassion is the biggest one. And I think it also gives you an awareness that when you start to allow yourself to be human and make mistakes and be vulnerable, get things wrong, and, you know, burn out sometimes, and give yourself the compassion to recognize that, you also are able to recognize that everybody else on that journey, every other founder, any CEO, are also just a human who has those moments, who have vulnerabilities, who get tired and take days off, and, you know, have emotions. And as soon as you recognize that, I think you can really step into your own mission and your own journey fully, knowing that we're all just human beings trying to move around life, trying to do, you know, whatever it is that feels good and right to us as best that we can. And you recognize your supporters better, you recognize what you need better, you're better at giving it to others. So yeah, I think self-compassion becomes compassion for others in a really beautiful way as well.
My next question is, how do you keep learning? Because you mentioned about how learning is really important to you. What do you do actively to keep learning?
So I'm really intentional about it. I try to make sure that I'm learning something for myself at all times, that there's always something that I am learning new or improving my learning on, but doing it for the sake of interest rather than the sake of accolade. And that took me a while to learn, that was where I actually got the joy of the learning, was doing it for the interest and not for the, oh, I need some kind of certificate at the end of this, or it should be something I put on my CV, versus actually I'm like super interested in this topic, and I'm just gonna give this a go, and following those different interests, and, you know, always having something that's just for me, just for my learning.
I love that.
I think is really intentional about. So the most recent that I've just finished, actually, and probably it's a funny example because it really does cross over with work, but it goes to show that there's a genuine interest there. So I just did a transport behavior change short course at the Active Travel Academy. So there's evening classes. Again, just because the interest was there, I read the course material and was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to learn about this. And, you know, it was incredibly eye-opening. And of course, there's absolutely application to our day-to-day work. But, you know, I chose that because I wanted to learn something. It was the interest was there. So now that I've just completed that, I have got a new sewing machine, and I'm going to be learning a little bit about that now, and
That's amazing.
excited to try a new skill, try something new. So yeah, I think being really intentional about it is super important, and then you apply that intentionality in the rest of your life, because when I step into any new conversation, new partnership, we always start from that mindset of information gathering, of learning. And then we go forward, and it makes a huge difference. So yeah, being intentional.
I love that. I love the difference between the two things that one thing that you've just finished and the next thing. But it really resonates with me, just the need to be intentional and not to just accidentally learn stuff, but actually kind of going out of your way to think about what is that curriculum for yourself and what does that look like. Very lastly, what is one call to action that you'd like to give to our listeners?
Oh, just one. It's the joyful thing, you know, be joyful and share the joy, share the moments that need to be celebrated, that maybe aren't celebrated. You know, when you've had a great day, talk about that, share that. When you're working on a great project, share it, talk about it, highlight it. When you have a colleague who's done something incredible, celebrate them. I think making sure that we don't forget to not only stop and reflect that we've spoken about, but also stop and celebrate these really amazing achievements and innovations and projects and collaborations that are happening all around us, and not just get bogged down in the challenges and the barriers and the struggle to make a change. Celebrate the changes that are happening. That's incredibly important. And I think, if we can do more of that, if we can celebrate our own successes and celebrate the successes of others more, it's only going to become easier to do more of those things. And it's only become more positive, more engaged. You're going to engage more people. You're going to bring new ideas in. So I think, sharing the joy and celebrating those moments of success and change, that is the call to action. Have fun doing what you're doing, be interested in it, and celebrate that.
Wonderful. Thank you. What a great call to action, and what a great episode. I think there's so many learning, so many kind of teachings in there. So Georgia, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for our listeners, and I'll see you on the next Women in Transport podcast.
Thank you.